The week leading up to Christmas is supposed to be a time filled with joy, laughter, and the comforting chaos of last-minute shopping. Stores are decorated in twinkling lights, families hustle to buy gifts, and neighborhoods glow with anticipation of the holiday spirit. It's a season that often brings people together. Friends gather for parties, children excitedly prepare their wish lists, and families come together over warm meals and nostalgic traditions. But in stark contrast to all the merriment, the Bletch family found themselves in a setting no one should have to endure, especially not during the holidays. A Muskegon courtroom, sitting silently, hearts shattered, as they faced the man who had stolen their daughter's life. This courtroom wasn't a space of peace or closure that day. It was a chamber of grief, pain, and barely suppressed rage. The air was tense as victim impact statements began, each word heavy with sorrow and anger. Rebecca Bletch's family had waited years for justice, and here they were, speaking directly to her killer, hoping he'd listen, hoping he'd feel the weight of what he'd done. But then, in a moment so cruel and outrageous it left the entire courtroom stunned, the man stood up without warning. He calmly asked to leave, and shockingly, the judge allowed it. As he turned to walk away, he glanced back at Rebecca's family and, with a smug, unrepentant smirk, blew them a kiss. The courtroom erupted. Gasps turned to shouts as people screamed words like monster and coward. The raw fury was undeniable. But this display of arrogance and cruelty wasn't new for the man in question. He had done this before, because the Bletch family wasn't the only one grieving the loss of a loved one. This man had a past far more disturbing than anyone could imagine, and it all began with a woman named Jessica Heeringa. Jessica Heeringa was a 25-year-old mother trying to put her life back together, one long day at a time. Living in Norton Shores, Michigan, she was known for her warm smile, her kindness, and above all, her love for her 3-year-old son, Zevin. Her life hadn't been easy. She had stumbled, made mistakes, and fought personal demons, including a battle with substance abuse. But by the spring of 2013, Jessica was trying hard to climb out of that dark place. She had goals, she had purpose, and most of all, she had her son, who she loved more than anything in the world. He was her reason to keep going. Jessica worked at an Exxon gas station, a modest job, but it gave her a chance to provide for Zevin. Her boyfriend, Dakota Clayle Dyer, had recently lost his job, which meant Jessica had to shoulder the burden of keeping their family afloat. Their relationship had its share of problems, arguments, instability, but Jessica was determined to make it work. She picked up every shift she could, even the less desirable. She didn't complain. That's just the kind of woman she was. Responsible, hardworking, trying. At the gas station, she typically worked the safer daytime shifts. But when money got tight, Jessica agreed to take on evening hours, including a night shift that ran until 11 p.m. It wasn't ideal. Working alone at night as a young woman in an unsupervised station was risky, but Jessica needed the money. So, on April 26, 2013, Jessica woke up, handled her daily errands, went shopping at 2:44 p.m., and headed to work by 5 p.m., dressed in her red Exxon shirt. It was just another long shift, or so she thought. No one knew that night would be the last time anyone saw Jessica alive. It was just past 11 p.m. on April 26, 2013, when a distressed customer made a chilling 911 call. The caller's voice trembled with uncertainty. They had stopped at the Exxon gas station on Sternberg Road in Norton Shores, expecting the usual. Someone at the counter, lights on, business as usual. But what they found instead was eerily unsettling. The store was lit, the front door was unlocked, and the place looked open. But no one was there. No clerk behind the counter, no one inside the small store. And outside, near the gas pumps, a car sat abandoned. It was all too strange. It didn't look like a robbery. Nothing was broken, nothing was ransacked. It looked like whoever was working simply stepped out for a moment, but never came back. The police responded quickly. As they arrived, something about the scene struck them immediately. On the counter inside the store, a woman's purse was left untouched. Inside it, nearly $400 in cash and cigarettes. Her jacket was also there. These weren't the things someone would leave behind if they had left willingly, especially not during a night shift. The cash register was still full. The station hadn't been robbed. It had been abandoned. They pulled the last sales receipt, a cigarette lighter, sold at 10:55 p.m., just 5 minutes before the 911 call. Jessica Heeringa had disappeared somewhere between those 5 minutes. As officers examined the store and the area around it, their eyes landed on something more disturbing. Small red specks dotted the concrete outside the station. At first glance, it was easy to dismiss, but it didn't take long for investigators to suspect it was blood. Then came another discovery, a battery cover from a laser sight, likely for a firearm, left behind. Jessica was missing, and something terrible had happened. Jessica Heeringa had vanished without a trace, and the initial hours of the investigation were marked by urgency and confusion. Norton Shores police realized quickly that they had a major problem on their hands. Jessica's disappearance wasn't a case of someone simply walking off the job. Everything she owned was still inside the gas station: her purse, jacket, money, and most critically, she had left in the middle of her shift. The gas station itself offered little help. Incredibly, there were no surveillance cameras installed, not inside, not outside, nothing to show who had come or gone, and no way to capture any part of the incident. The fact that a young woman was working alone at night in a poorly secured gas station shocked the community. Even investigators were baffled. In a time where surveillance is standard practice, here was a modern gas station with 0 cameras and no coworker present. Jessica had been utterly alone, and whoever took her knew that. Police canvassed the area, asking nearby businesses if their surveillance cameras caught anything unusual. They also interviewed anyone who might have passed by the station that night. Then a potential lead surfaced. Jessica's manager came forward. She recalled riding by the gas station around 11 p.m. that same night with her husband. As they passed, they saw something strange. A silver minivan had pulled around the back of the station, not the front where customers usually park. The manager said it seemed out of place, and she feared the station might be getting robbed, so she slowed down. She spotted a man in an orange or red sweatshirt standing near the van with the rear hatch open. Nothing obvious happened, so she rode off. She didn't realize until later that she may have witnessed the abduction in progress. After the gas station manager shared her account of the silver minivan and the suspicious man with crazy wavy hair, investigators realized they finally had a lead, a physical description, and a possible vehicle. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. They immediately checked nearby surveillance footage from traffic and neighboring businesses. It paid off. Between 11:02 p.m. and 11:05 p.m., just minutes after Jessica's last recorded sale, a silver Chrysler Town & Country minivan was captured on at least 3 different surveillance cameras driving away from the area. The timing lined up perfectly. The police went back to canvassing for witnesses, and their efforts quickly bore more fruit. Another person came forward, a man who had stopped at the gas station on the night Jessica went missing. He told police that he had seen Jessica talking to a man in a silver minivan. He recalled how the man seemed flirtatious and oddly persistent. He described him almost exactly the same way the manager had: wavy hair, red or orange sweatshirt, possibly mid to late 30s. The man's behavior stood out enough that this witness remembered it in detail, a red flag that couldn't be ignored. But perhaps the most chilling account came from a woman who visited the gas station just the night before Jessica disappeared. She had noticed the same man hanging around Jessica, standing too close, talking too much. She even approached Jessica and warned her about working alone so late at night. Before Jessica could respond, the man cut in and said with a smirk, "She's got her customers looking out for her." The woman felt uneasy. Jessica shook her head subtly, her eyes giving away that something wasn't right. The woman trusted her instincts. She waited in her car until Jessica locked up and left safely. 3 independent witnesses. Same man, same vehicle. The net was tightening. Despite the momentum investigators had built early in the case, the eyewitness accounts, the composite sketch, and the silver minivan captured on surveillance, things began to stall. Tips trickled in, but none led to Jessica. The man in the minivan seemed to have vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. Police held press conferences, released the sketch publicly, and pleaded with the community for any new leads. Jessica's family did everything they could to keep her name in the public eye, organizing vigils, circulating flyers, and sharing her story across every media outlet that would listen. But as weeks turned into months, the hope began to dim. With no physical evidence linking any suspect to the scene, no security footage, no recovered body, and no DMA, the case grew colder with every passing day. Jessica had seemingly vanished into thin air. The emotional toll on her family, especially her young son Zevin, was unbearable. Her parents couldn't sleep, her sister fell into a depression. The town of Norton Shores, once safe and quiet, now lived under the shadow of fear and confusion. How could a young woman disappear from a gas station in the middle of town and no one know what happened? Behind the scenes, detectives were still working. They re-interviewed witnesses, followed up on tips, and kept monitoring similar crimes across Michigan. But nothing stuck. Jessica's photo began to fade from headlines, and the public's attention slowly shifted. Still, her loved ones refused to let her name disappear. They knew someone out there had to know something, whether it was the man in the van or someone who had crossed paths with him. But no one could have predicted that it would take another violent crime and another woman's life to reignite the investigation into Jessica's mysterious disappearance. On June 29, 2014, 14 months after Jessica Heeringa vanished, a quiet neighborhood in Dalton Township was shattered by horror. That day, 36-year-old Rebecca Bletch went out for a jog, something she did often along the familiar roads near her home. She was a beloved special education teacher, deeply rooted in her community, known for her compassion and warmth. But as dusk approached and she didn't return home, her family grew concerned. Hours later, Rebecca's lifeless body was found by the side of the road, and what was initially thought to be a hit and run quickly turned into something much darker. When investigators arrived, they realized Rebecca hadn't been struck by a vehicle. She had been shot multiple times in the head at close range. The scene was chilling. Shell casings were scattered near her body, and an autopsy later confirmed fragments of bullets embedded in her skull. This wasn't a random accident. It was a targeted, brutal execution. And just like Jessica's disappearance, there were no direct witnesses, no immediate suspects, and no clear motive. The violence was sudden, senseless, and deeply personal. The small Michigan community, already haunted by Jessica's unresolved case, was thrown into panic. Two women, both seemingly innocent, kind-hearted, and loved, had been violently attacked just miles apart. First a disappearance, now a murder. The parallels were disturbing. Yet despite this, police couldn't tie the two cases together, not officially. There was no direct forensic link between Rebecca and Jessica. And once again, just like in Jessica's case, the investigation into Rebecca's murder stalled. Leads dried up, the killer had vanished without leaving behind anything concrete. But the similarities were impossible to ignore. Two women, two late-night crimes, and a community slowly beginning to fear that a serial predator was on the loose. Nearly 2 years after Rebecca Bletch's murder and 3 years after Jessica Heeringa's disappearance, a teenage girl in Laketown Township unknowingly stepped into the crosshairs of a predator. But this time, things didn't go according to his plan. It was April 16, 2016. The young girl had left a party late at night and gotten lost on the way home. She was disoriented and alone, unsure of where she was, when a man in a silver minivan pulled up beside her. He rolled down his window and asked if she needed help. Calmly, he offered his phone so she could call someone. She hesitated, wary but desperate. The man's demeanor seemed casual, even polite, as he coaxed her to get inside his van. Reluctantly, she agreed. But the moment she sat in the passenger seat, the door locks clicked down. Her gut twisted. Before she could react, the man pulled a gun, a pistol fitted with a laser sight, and pointed it at her. Her blood ran cold. In that moment, she knew she had walked into something deadly. But she didn't freeze. Her survival instinct kicked in hard. Thinking quickly, the girl told him she was getting carsick and asked him to roll the window down for air. He complied. Then, in a move that saved her life, she managed to twist herself out through the window and launched herself onto the pavement while the van was still moving. She ran. She didn't look back. She was injured, battered, scraped, terrified, but alive. And she went straight to the police. Her account, paired with her physical description of the van and its driver, was incredibly detailed. She told officers the man had wild, wavy hair, a reddish-orange sweatshirt, and drove a silver Chrysler minivan. It was a near-perfect match to the suspect in Jessica's case. And this time, they had a name: Jeffrey Willis. When investigators ran the name Jeffrey Willis through their system, alarms started going off. The man who had just attempted to kidnap a teenage girl had a disturbing criminal history, and the more they dug, the darker it got. Jeffrey Willis was a married man, a father, and had once worked as a janitor at a local school district. But behind that ordinary facade was a man who had long been hiding in plain sight, someone with a hidden obsession with violence, power, and control. He had previously served time for minor offenses, but nothing that prepared police for what they would uncover next. Armed with a search warrant, detectives began an exhaustive search of Jeffrey's silver Chrysler Town and Country. What they found inside was horrifying. A collection of tools and supplies that pointed not only to kidnapping, but premeditated violence. There were syringes filled with a mysterious clear substance, which later turned out to be a powerful sedative. There were handcuffs, ropes, and other forms of restraints. A firearm was also found, one that had been tampered with to remove its serial number. The battery cover was missing from its laser sight, the exact kind of part that had been found outside the Exxon station on the night Jessica disappeared. It was a mobile torture chamber, carefully designed for one purpose: to capture and control. But the nightmare didn't end there. Investigators then turned their attention to Jeffrey's home and seized his computers. What they uncovered made seasoned detectives sick. His hard drive was packed with violent pornographic material, much of it involving women and young girls. He had folders labeled with initials, including one marked JLH, short for Jessica Lynn Heeringa, and another RSB for Rebecca Sue Bletch. Inside were pictures, news clippings, and files that only the killer would keep. The monster behind the wheel had finally been unmasked. Inside Jeffrey Willis's home, a new dimension of his depravity unfolded. What investigators found on his computer didn't just link him to crimes. It revealed a disturbing glimpse into the mind of a predator who thrived on control, fantasy, and violence. Among the sea of graphic and violent materials, detectives stumbled upon a folder simply labeled VICs, short for victims. Within it, two deeply unsettling subfolders stood out: JLH and RSB. These weren't random file names. JLH corresponded to Jessica Lynn Heeringa, and RSB matched Rebecca Sue Bletch. What lay inside was chilling. Each folder contained photos of the women, screenshots of news coverage about their cases, maps, handwritten notes, and even personal information investigators believed had been gathered before the crimes. Jessica's folder included images of her Exxon workplace, indicating Willis had been stalking her. Worse still, the password used to access one of the protected folders was JLH2713, Jessica's initials and the date she vanished, April 27, 2013. It was as though he had turned her murder into a personal trophy, memorialized with sickening pride. That password alone was a silent confession. As the evidence mounted, investigators also matched the firearm found in Willis's van to the shell casings recovered near Rebecca Bletch's body. Ballistics confirmed it was the murder weapon. Another haunting detail emerged. The gun belonged to a female co-worker of Willis who had reported it stolen long before. She had no idea it had become the instrument of a young woman's execution. The case was tightening like a vice. The minivan, the weapon, the red sweatshirt, the digital files, every piece painted the same terrifying picture. The same man who had attempted to kidnap a teenager had very likely taken Jessica and murdered Rebecca. And now, police had the proof to hold him accountable, even without a body. With a mountain of digital, physical, and testimonial evidence in hand, police moved swiftly. In September 2016, Jeffrey Willis was arrested, not just for the attempted kidnapping of the teenage girl, but also for the kidnapping and murder of Jessica Heeringa and the cold-blooded murder of Rebecca Bletch. It was a breakthrough years in the making. For the families who had waited in agony, Jessica's and Rebecca's, it was a moment filled with both relief and sorrow. Their worst fears had been confirmed. This man had been among them all along. Following his arrest, police obtained search warrants for all properties connected to Jeffrey. One location in particular stood out, a secluded rural piece of land roughly 15 minutes from the Exxon gas station. It belonged to Jeffrey's late grandfather and had since been inherited by him. Phone records placed Jeffrey at the property on the night Jessica disappeared. Investigators rushed to the scene, desperate for closure. What they found added even more weight to the case. Industrial-strength bleach, gloves, and cleaning supplies, all hidden and clearly used. Though Jessica's body was not recovered, the presence of these items suggested a cleanup had taken place. There were also scratches and bruises found on Jeffrey's arms and face in the days following Jessica's disappearance. His co-workers remembered them clearly. He brushed them off as nothing. But now, investigators saw them for what they likely were, signs of a fierce struggle. Jessica had fought back. She had tried to escape. Everything pointed to a man who had stalked Jessica, waited for his opportunity, and then carried out a meticulously planned abduction. He had returned to life as usual, hiding in plain sight, all while Jessica's family prayed for her return. But even with Jeffrey in custody, one critical piece of the puzzle was still missing: Jessica herself. In May 2018, 5 years after Jessica Heeringa vanished from her night shift at the Exxon gas station, her suspected killer, Jeffrey Willis, stood trial. There was one glaring complication: Jessica's body had never been found. In many murder cases, this would be a major obstacle. But in this case, the weight of the evidence was so overwhelming that prosecutors felt confident moving forward without a body. It was a rare and difficult kind of trial, but they were determined to secure justice. The courtroom was heavy with emotion. Jessica's family sat through every painful moment, listening to a parade of experts, witnesses, and forensic analysts walk the jury through the night of April 26, 2013, and the monster who had stalked her. Prosecutors presented the contents of Jeffrey's van: the firearm with a missing laser sight battery cover, just like the one found outside the station, syringes filled with sedatives, and restraints. They showed the digital horrors found on his computer, including Jessica's name encoded in a password, and files organized around her disappearance. They showed surveillance footage of Jeffrey's van leaving the gas station minutes after Jessica's last transaction. Witness after witness described the same man: red sweatshirt, wild hair, driving a silver minivan. Even without a body, the prosecution's story was clear. Jeffrey had targeted Jessica. He had visited the station at least 15 times in the weeks prior, likely studying her routine. On the night of April 26th, he waited until closing time, lured her into his vehicle, and overpowered her. She fought, fiercely, but she didn't make it out. The evidence suggested she was sexually assaulted, murdered, and her body hidden away with the help of bleach and meticulous planning. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping, life in prison, no parole. Just when the Heeringa family thought there could be no more horrors left to uncover, a shocking twist emerged, one that pulled another person into the dark orbit of Jeffrey Willis. His own cousin, Kevin Blum, a former Michigan Department of Corrections officer, was arrested and charged with lying to police during the investigation. For years, Kevin had silenced, but eventually the truth began to unravel. Kevin knew more about Jessica Heeringa's disappearance than he had ever let on, and his knowledge wasn't based on speculation. It was firsthand. Blum initially denied involvement, but investigators knew something didn't add up. He had knowledge of details that hadn't been made public, and when pressed, he finally cracked. Kevin confessed that he had helped Jeffrey dispose of Jessica's body. According to Kevin, Jeffrey had called him the day after Jessica disappeared. He invited Kevin over under the pretense of a party, but when Kevin arrived, there was no party. Instead, he found Jessica, naked, unconscious, bound, and bleeding from a head wound, lying on the floor of Jeffrey's garage. Shocked and terrified, Kevin claimed he didn't know what to do. But instead of going to police, he helped Jeffrey wrap Jessica's body in a sheet, load her into his car, and bury her. They drove to a secluded area off Sheridan Road near Laketon Road, the same area police had once searched, and dug a final resting place for Jessica in the middle of the night. Kevin said he didn't know if Jessica was already dead when they buried her. That uncertainty added another horrific layer to her already heartbreaking story. Kevin pleaded no contest to being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to time in jail. But despite his confession, Jessica's body has never been found, and Jeffrey has never confirmed where she is. Though Jeffrey Willis had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison for both the kidnapping and murder of Jessica Heeringa and the murder of Rebecca Bletch, the journey for justice didn't end in the courtroom. In many ways, it had only just begun. What happened to these women, especially Jessica, who was abducted while working alone at night in an unsecured gas station, exposed dangerous gaps in workplace safety and courtroom policy. Their families refused to let these injustices go unanswered. For the Bletch family, the final blow came during sentencing. As they delivered their victim impact statements, a sacred moment meant to voice grief and pain, Jeffrey stood up, smirked, and walked out of the courtroom. Shockingly, the judge allowed it. But as he exited, he blew a kiss to the grieving family, a final, cruel gesture. The room erupted in outrage. "Coward," someone shouted. "Monster," another cried. It was a moment that symbolized just how broken parts of the system could be, even in the pursuit of justice. Determined to prevent this from happening again, the Bletch family fought for legislative change. Their efforts led to the creation of Rebecca's Law, requiring convicted defendants in Michigan to remain in the courtroom for victim impact statements, ensuring they are forced to face the emotional consequences of their crimes. The bill passed the Michigan Senate on May 10, 2018, and was signed into law by Governor Rick Snyder 2 weeks later. Jessica's family pushed for their own reform. Outraged that she had been left to work alone at night with no surveillance protection, they advocated for the Jessica Heeringa Act. It required late-night gas stations and convenience stores to install cameras and always have 2 staff members on duty. Though the bill was passed in December 2013, it still hasn't become formal law, blocked by concerns over costs. But Jessica's family hasn't given up. To them, this fight is more than political, it's personal. It's about making sure no other family endure what they did. Years have passed since Jessica Heeringa disappeared, and though her killer now sits behind bars, her story remains painfully unfinished. Jessica's parents, her sister Samantha, and her now-grown son Zevin still wake up every day without answers to the one question that haunts them most. Where is Jessica? Despite Jeffrey Willis's conviction, despite the confessions, the evidence, and the mountains of proof, he has never revealed the location of Jessica's body. He refuses to speak. He holds on to that final piece of power like a trophy, keeping the Heeringa family trapped in limbo. The lack of a burial, of a gravesite, of a place to say goodbye, it's a wound that never truly closes. Jessica's loved ones have begged for answers. They've made public appeals, written letters, and even tried to reason with Jeffrey, but nothing has worked. Whether it's about power, control, or cruelty, Jeffrey's silence continues to cause unimaginable pain. Even with his cousin Kevin Blum's confession, detailing how Jessica's body was buried on a remote stretch of land, authorities have still not recovered her remains. Time, weather, and the vast woods have erased the evidence. And so, Jessica is still out there, somewhere. As for her son Zevin, he lost everything far too young. First his mother, then his father. After Jessica's disappearance, Jessica's father, Dakota Dyer, spiraled deeper into drug use and was arrested in 2014. With both parents gone, Jessica's sister Samantha stepped in to seek emergency custody. What became of that case is unclear, but Zevin would now be close to adulthood. Wherever he is, it's impossible not to wonder how deeply this tragedy shaped him. A boy born into chaos, raised in grief, and left with only fragments of memories of his mother. The case of Jessica Heeringa reminds us that justice is not always complete. A life taken, a family shattered, a body never found. But her name lives on, not just in headlines or courtrooms, but in every gas station safety bill, every family fighting for answers, and every heart that refuses to forget. Jessica deserved more. And still, her family waits.